We are back with another episode of App Stories. This is episode 275, and we are going to talk today about our iPad 16 wishes. This episode of App Stories is sponsored by Revenue Cat, Pillow, and SourceGraph. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well today. I'm excited to talk to you about iPadOS 16. I mean, I have very mixed feelings about the iPad this year. I mean, you and I have been talking about this on and off. It's like, I mean, it really comes down to the fact that it feels like the M1 and the iPad Pro is not really being leveraged the way we'd like Apple to do that. And so, we can talk about ways today, I think, that we'd actually like them to do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of dissatisfaction, I think, in the iPad community.
Yeah.
Especially, it's been building up over the past year. I'm about to publish this big story that I've been working on about, like, it's about the Mac, but it's also about this problem. So be on the lookout for that soon. But yes, iPadOS 16. Let's jump right into that. I have a ton of things that I want to cover, and I also want to mention a few shortcuts related things. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I want to get more from multitasking in iPadOS 16. I mentioned many times already on App Stories Unconnected, on Mac Stories, how last year's iPadOS 15 release was mostly this foundational release, right? That it improved the existing system, the existing multitasking system for new users or iPad users who never really and fully understood multitasking on iPad. Last year, they added that menu at the top of the screen to manage split views and slide over and full screen apps with visual indicators. So they kept the existing drag and drop mechanic for arranging apps and windows on screen using touch, but they also introduced this new visual menu, which kind of resembles the same menu that you get on macOS when you hold down on the green button in the window controls.
Right.
And obviously they introduced a new look for keyboard shortcuts when you hold down the command key, and they also introduced the globe key modifier for multitasking shortcuts. All of those are foundational updates to simplify or refine something that already existed. My problem is that last year they didn't really introduce anything new.
True. They just made what was there more obvious,
Exactly.
I think, for people.
So I really feel like it's time, now that we have this new foundation, great, I like it, it's time to go beyond. It's time to offer more options for power users, because the biggest problem of the iPad is that the hardware says, I'm an iPad Pro, right? I got the M1, I got tons of RAM, I got a beautiful display, but the software doesn't. The software doesn't say I'm a pro device for pro users. So for multitasking, there's a few things I would like to see. First of all, let me do more than just 2 apps on screen at the same time with split view. I would love to do 3, maybe even 4 in a grid, but I would like to have more grid-based options for multitasking. I don't want to do, and let me be clear here, I don't want to have Mac-like overlapping windows on iPadOS. I just want to have more freedom in terms of the layouts and the number of concurrent apps I see on screen at the same time. And my secondary wish here, I would love to have even deeper integration with the keyboard. I should be able to have, first of all, a faster Spotlight. Spotlight on iPad compared to Spotlight on the Mac, or even app launchers on the Mac, like Raycast or Alfred or Launchbar. It's so slow and clunky.
Yeah, it is.
And
it's even worse if you have more. The more apps you have, the slower it is too.
It gets worse the more apps and things you install. So in addition to multiple layouts for split view and more freedom there, I want to be able to quickly create split views without having to do much else with the screen. Just let me open Spotlight and let me say, search for app, place on the right. Search for another app, place on the left. Like, Let me do all that with commands and hotkeys from the keyboard inside Spotlight.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. And I'll tell you, the one thing that I really want is is three apps on screen at once, because I would rather have that, I think, than to rely on slide over. I've never been,
Yes.
slide over to me just feels a little clunky. It's a little hard to manage those windows. And so I'd much rather see all three of those apps at once because if I'm using it, kind of swiping it on and off the screen and having it block the view of one of the other apps is just a little bit too much for me. So yeah, I'd love to see that. That would be fantastic. And I think that would go hand in hand with some other things which I think we've got in our notes here, is the external display support.
Oh, you want to jump into that? Well,
I think we should go right into it because it kind of fits with this, right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, part of improving multitasking on iPad, I think, should also be, it should also involve giving users the freedom to manage those windows and place them on an external display. So it all comes down to this, in my opinion. What's so unique about the iPad is that it can be three things at the same time. It can be a tablet, it can be a laptop, or it can be this thing like sort of like a desktop workstation, something that you dock at your desk, and then you sort of bring your own display, mouse, and or trackpad and keyboard, and it transforms into this desktop computer. The problem is that right now the iPad only excels at being a tablet, because it leaves a ton to be desired when it comes to being a laptop and when it comes to being this sort of desktop replacement. For external displays, I think it's time to go beyond the basic mirroring that's long been the only way to connect an iPad to an external display. And I think Apple should do a couple of things here. They should give power users the option to choose. When you connect an iPad Pro to an external display, you can choose to view the same iPad UI, but upscaled to the external display. So no more black bars around, with the pillar boxing, basically. No more black bars around the iPad UI. Let me choose to mirror the iPad, and that's fine, but upscale the UI to match the resolution of the external display. And that's one option. The second option is essentially what is called extended desktop mode on macOS. Let's call it extended home screen mode on iPadOS. Basically, turn the external display into an additional space where I can place my windows, right? That's possible now because we have a pointer on iPad. We have this UI element that lets me virtually interact with Windows, even if I'm not touching the display. That's perfect for external display integration. And we have support for multi-window, obviously. That's existed since iPadOS 13. So all the technical pieces are in place. So let me take a window and drag it onto an external display. Or maybe, this could be done with drag and drop. It could be done with the multitasking menu. But essentially, give me the option to have more than one display connected to my iPad. Now, again, I don't mean that I want to have overlapping windows. Like, I don't want to have, the window resize controls on the external display. It can still be based off a split view, but we go back to what I said a few minutes ago. If I'm using an external display, and maybe it's a bigger display than my iPad's, 13-inch screen, maybe on that 32-inch display, I can do 4 apps in split view. Or maybe I could even do 5 apps in split view if it's a giant monitor, So depending on the size of the display, let me choose the kind of layout that I want to have. It doesn't have to involve overlapping macOS-like windows, but it becomes an additional space for me to get my work done and to place windows for apps that I'm using.
Yeah, and this kind of setup is where the rumors about a new iPad Pro make sense to me, in that you might need more memory, for instance, to drive 4 or 5 apps at one time on an external display.
Yes.
Now, for existing iPad Pros, like the M1 model that you and I are using, maybe that still can run 3 or 4, but I could see, the extra power of a new iPad Pro enabling new capabilities like that. And I feel like we are partway there already because of universal control. Obviously that is not extending your iPad's display to the Mac. It's using your iPad with your Mac. But Apple has clearly seen that there's a role to play with the iPad on a desk, basically. To me, that's what universal control is all about. It's the iPad is something that can be a workstation at your desk, and it can be used with your Mac. And I would hope what we're going to see is that it can also be used by itself on your desk with a big display, because that's the advantage of sitting at a desk, is you can have a great big display, whether it's the studio display or something else right there, and give you lots of space and make it really easy to see everything that you want to work on. So yeah, I'd love to see that this year.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by RevenueCat. If you're a developer, your time should be spent focused on what makes your app special, not with StoreKit. In-app subscriptions are critical to a lot of apps' success, but getting the infrastructure right is tough. That is, unless you're using RevenueCat. RevenueCat is payments infrastructure simplified. You don't have to worry about managing servers or writing complex back-end code. They take care of all of it for you. What's more, RevenueCat is cross-platform, so when you decide to expand beyond iOS to Android or the web, you can still use RevenueCat. RevenueCat lets you sync status across all of your customers' devices, and it has terrific out-of-the-box analytics to track your revenue, customer retention, and churn, so you're always on top of how your business is performing. RevenueCat integrates in-app purchase data with best-in-class tools, too, and it's trusted by over 9,000 apps, including ones like Notion, StockTwits, and the photography app VSCO. Set up RevenueCat today. Integrating with your app will take just hours, not days. So what are you waiting for? Visit RevenueCat.com to learn more today. There's a link in the show notes, too, which will let them know that you came from App Stories. Again, that URL is RevenueCat.com. RevenueCat, subscription management built for mobile apps. Our thanks to RevenueCat for their support of the show.
We may have been thinking about this all wrong. Because so far, here's my other theory. So far, I mentioned you can keep the current split view system, right? So no overlapping windows. You can just extend split view. But what if Apple is saying, well, we tried split view. We have split view on macOS as well. And it lets you do, a split between two apps. But if you want to get more things done at once, the only way is overlapping windows. Let's now, for the sake of the argument, let's entertain this idea. Traditionally, Apple, we've seen when they bring macOS features to the iPad, they don't exactly bring them exactly as they exist on the Mac.
Right.
They simplify them. They sort of remix them for the iPad. They adapt them to the iPad. So here's another theory. And it's also actually something that I would like to see in iPadOS 16. What if Apple says, fine, we'll give you overlapping windows, but we'll give you fewer controls for those overlapping windows. You won't have the traffic light buttons like on macOS. You won't be able to freely resize a window. You'll just have a few options. You'll just have a few presets for those floating windows. And we may have been looking at the answer for this for an entire year, basically. Yeah. What if QuickNote from iPadOS 15 becomes the foundation for a Mac-like, but simplified for iPad, system to have actual floating overlapping windows on iPad? And I guess when I'm saying floating, I shouldn't also assume overlapping, because that's another important point. So what I'm saying is I would love to see QuickNote become an API in iPadOS 16. I think all kinds of apps should be able to to spawn a window that floats and can be resized to 3 different dimensions, just like the Quick Note window in iPadOS 15. Like, let me have Quick Note, but for whatever I want. Or look at it this way. Quick Note is like picture-in-picture for apps, right? It's like,
exactly.
So let me have that for whatever app I want to use. Let me do Quick Note for Mail. Let me do Quick Note for Safari. Let me do Quick Note for Twitter. Like, make that a window mode is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I love that idea. And I think it does fit the iPad particularly well because you could, slide those windows off to the side like you can picture-in-picture and then bring them back out when you need them. They would snap to a grid of sorts so that they wouldn't
overlap. They would float, exactly, but not overlap. But
right. They could live in the corners and maybe in the middle at the top and bottom, that sort of thing.
But at that point, my question becomes, right? What's the difference then between Quick Note and Slide Over? See, that's the complication that Apple is facing here. If you're turning Quick Note, which is arguably like I actually prefer the gesture and I prefer the size of the Quick Note window to a Slide Over window.
I would get rid of Slide Over. Is what I would do, is just get rid of it entirely.
Yeah. I would actually get rid of Slide Over and turn Quick Note into this new windowing mode that lets you have multiple apps in floating mode, but I would get rid of also like the Slide Over size is awkward and the format of the window is awkward, right? It's like having a stretched out iPhone app on the iPad. I just find the Quick Note aspect ratio more comfortable to use on an iPad Pro.
Yeah, it works better for a lot of apps. I mean, a lot of apps don't work very well in that narrow orientation.
Yes. So I would actually get rid of Slide Over completely. I will allow Split View to go up to 3 or 4 apps at the same time. And I will use Quick Note as the foundation for the new Slide Over, right? Don't call it floating mode. I don't know. Get rid of Slide Over and, rethink that feature around that sort of layout.
I think the thing of Slide Over that I would keep would be the way they stack, and that you can then kind of go through each one, because I can imagine a situation where your Quick Note style windows could be slid off to the side of the screen and stacked so that they're all there kind of in the same place, but then they're easy to kind of flip through and find again, but with the new aspect ratio and the other things that Quick Note adds.
Yeah, but honestly, like, I also feel like at this point, if it needs to be this complicated, maybe the solution is just to say, you know what, you can now place 3 or 4 apps on screen at the same time. And that would probably solve all of my needs, right? Because I could do, one app is filling the left half of the screen, and the 2 apps are filling the top right and bottom right corners of the screen. And I'm using 3 apps at the same time.
Right. No, and I think that's true in the sense that if you could do 3 apps on screen at one time where you don't have to rely on Slide Over, that would go a long way towards solving a lot of the problems. I think, there's diminishing returns as you increase the number of apps on the screen. But there's still certain kinds of apps that I think would benefit from the Quick Note window as well as more things on screen at once. Maybe it's files, for instance, where you want to go quickly grab something and drag it into an app that you've got open on the screen. Or maybe it's checking your email real quickly or messages. There are things that I'd like to have very close at hand, but not necessarily on screen at all times.
Yeah. I guess my only concern is how many times can you reinvent multitasking and the app switcher until you realize, well, you know what, we're just going to let users grab a window and place it where they want.
Right.
Maybe that's the answer. But then again, using the same philosophy, maybe the answer is you're just going to grab a window and you're going to snap it to a side of the display. And you cannot freely resize those windows. Those windows do not overlap, but you have this simplified, right, controls that are perfect for iPad, that support the pointer, that support drag and drop, and now you have this greater freedom for these layouts that you can assemble. It's sort of like using, Moom or Better Touch Tool or these other window managers on the Mac where they simplify arranging windows on screen. Maybe that's just the answer. And, Power, I will be ecstatic to have that kind of feature, honestly, on iPad.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I use Magnet all the time on the Mac, and I love it.
Is another one, yes. So, well, we'll see. I know also, there's we've seen the rumors that Apple is rethinking the app switcher. Mark Gurman has said that so far in iPadOS 16, there's a new app switcher. Now, new app switcher, to me, sounds like they're bringing mission control to iPad. I have this theory, and I personally wish casting here, but I would love to see mission control come to iPad, if only because it would make perfect sense to have mission control for a kind of iPad where it's more like the Mac in the sense that you can have these multiple home screens, and each space, as they call it on the Mac, each desktop as its own windows, right? It's exactly like mission control on the Mac, where you have all your open windows and you have your different spaces. Now, the problem with the iPad and the app switcher is that it was originally based on the iPhone app switcher, which is just a list of your recently used windows. Yeah. And over time, they tacked on split view and slide over onto that app switcher. But what if the app switcher was actually mission control and more, I guess, workspace based, right? Instead of just recently used windows, what if you could create workspaces on your iPad? And you're like, here's the space where I'm working on, I don't know, composing this email. And here's the space where I'm listening to music. And you could manage your windows on a space-based environment.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a little different than the way mission control works too. I think, I do feel, I'm not sure where this is going with the rumors on the app switcher. It's hard to imagine exactly what that is, but I think something that is workspace based does make a lot of sense. It's less app based, but that's a pretty big departure from the historical norm, and because both the iPhone and the iPad have always been very app focused and not file focused, not work focused in that sense. I mean, there's not the idea of workspaces, but I think it could work. We should talk about the Apple Pencil maybe too, Federico.
Oh, okay.
I feel like the Apple Pencil, I don't know about you, I don't use my Apple Pencil a ton. I actually keep it attached to my iPad mini most of the time.
I never use it.
So. And I do wonder sometimes, why do I even have this attached to my iPad mini? Because I don't, every now and then I'll like pull it off and kind of use it to navigate the UI and stuff like that. But I don't use it a lot. And I feel like there's more that could be done with this. And I know we've talked a little bit in the past about some sort of radial UI, where the Apple Pencil is more than a drawing tool and a note-taking tool, and more than just a substitute for a finger, and actually invokes its own special modes on the iPad. And the app that I always think about when I think about this sort of thing is Concepts, which is the Infinite Canvas app that is for drawing and creating architectural schematics and product design and all sorts of things. And when you use Concepts, it has this unique UI that can be anchored to one of the corners of the iPad, and tapping on different parts of it radiates out concentric circles of things like colors for pens that you're drawing with and other tools, and other. It also has situations where you'll tap on the width of a pen, for instance, and a slider will appear where you can then right there in the UI decide how wide you want your marks to be. Now, this is all in a drawing context, but I could see that sort of thing working with something more than just drawing on an infinite canvas like Concepts it has.
Yeah. On that note, I think it's also time for Apple to do more when it comes to dynamically adapting the iPadOS UI based on the accessory that you're using. So, They've been doing some of this with the pointer that they introduced in iPadOS 13.4, right? So that if you have a pointer attached, the iPadOS UI, some buttons, they gain the highlight and the little parallax effect when you hover over them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Apple should do more. I think the iPadOS UI should actually change, not dramatically, but it should adapt more to the accessory that is currently being used. So if you have a pencil, there should be more pencil-only elements on screen. And if you're using a pointer, maybe the UI could become more compact because you have a more precise tool to click on buttons, sort of like on the Mac, right? Where you have more controls available because you have a more precise tool for pointing on those items. And if you're using touch, the UI could be simplified. That's actually something that I would like to see is you're using a pointer, we're going to give you more tools because you have a more precise input method right now.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm thinking about with the Apple Pencil, because that's about as precise as you can possibly get, because it's got it's as pointy as you get. And if you're moving towards more pro style apps, whatever that means, I mean, one of the things it means to me is they're apps with a lot of features and a lot of options and a lot of things that can be done in the app beyond that may make it easier to have an Apple Pencil where you can have a lot of options displayed on screen at once and select from them instead of having multiple levels of menus that have to be drilled through just because you only have so much real estate on the screen for picking things with touch.
Yeah.
Our thanks to Pillow for their support of App Stories. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can help improve your health and well-being in more ways than one. Pillow is a simple app that helps you be more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to help improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep automatically and give you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or iPad, you can do that too, with the touch of a button. If you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trend, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each sleep session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, or other noises that might be affecting your sleep. If your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of the sounds during each sleep session and give you a rating of that exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions about ways you can improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics to your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other health metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before going to bed, or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps can boost your productivity, creativity, and focus. If you have the chance to take one, you can use Pillow's Power Nap feature too. Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm feature. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is also privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data are encrypted and stored on your device in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't have to register or create an account to use Pillow, so you can use it anonymously and it doesn't collect or send your information anywhere else. Pillow is free to download on the App Store and comes with a set of great features that you can use for free every day. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a free 7-day trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started today. Again, that's pillow.app to try out this excellent sleep app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show.
All right. There's a few other things I want to mention before we talk about shortcuts a little.
All right.
So I've covered this multiple times. I would love to have presets of my favorite apps. I've been doing this on the Mac where Shortcuts has actions for this. I basically would love to have my favorite combinations of apps in the app switcher. Like let me mark Safari plus Notes as a favorite app pair, and let me instantly go back to that group of apps. What else? I would love to. This is something so weird. Last year, they introduced the shelf as the new
Mm-hmm.
window manager for iPadOS 15. The shelf does not have an undo button. So if you accidentally close a window in the shelf, you cannot bring back that window. That used to be a feature in the iPadOS 13 and 14 app switcher, where and it was called not app switcher, window manager. That it was called expose, actually, I think.
Right,
Um,
right.
and if you accidentally close the window, you could reopen that window. But they have removed that undo button from the shelf. And also the whole shelf thing, I don't love it. It's confusing how you need to activate the shelf. It's too hidden. I still feel like a lot of people don't know that you can open multiple windows for the same application on your iPad. And those previews are too small. Like, I
Yeah,
actually preferred the old expose view because the windows were bigger,
yep,
but
that's what I was going to
both
say.
expose and the shelf suffer from from the same problem, which is discoverability. A ton of people still don't know you can do multiple windows on your iPad.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they do pop up automatically now. Like if you
Yeah,
have a bunch of Safari windows
it
open
looks
and you
like the
open
dock
Safari,
though. Like, it's so
that's
confusing.
yes, I agree with you. That's the thing. It's both more in your face, and I find it actually kind of annoying that it pops up every single time because I don't
Yeah,
always want that. It's both more in your face, but I don't think it's super clear what all that is down there and why you're seeing that because you're not necessarily going to that app to pick between multiple windows. You may just be going back to Safari because you want to go back to the web page you were just looking at. You know what I mean?
yeah. Spotlight, I mentioned before, needs to be faster. I want to have faster, more customizable Spotlight. Give me a new UI for managing the sources of content in Spotlight and just make the thing faster, especially for running my shortcuts from Spotlight. But here's another another thing that I would love to see: native Spotlight extensions.
Mm,
Not completely wild to imagine if you consider Apple does Safari extensions
right.
and they have a Spotlight API already, but give developers a real tool to build more complex Spotlight integrations, to get more things done from Spotlight for different types of content, for different types of tasks based on their apps. This is a valid idea, as we've seen in Alfred, Launchbar, Raycast. It's the kind of thing that power users expect to have in application launchers on the Mac. And I think Apple could do a good job with native Spotlight extensions on all
Yeah.
platforms, but especially on iPad.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, I think, to do it as an extension of Spotlight as opposed to standalone apps like Alfred or Launchbar or Raycast, because I just feel like the security model and some of the other ways that iOS and iPadOS work that makes extensions a more viable way to deal with that on the iPad, and I'd be happy to see that. I mean,
Yep.
especially there's a lot of things that I do with Raycast that aren't just launching the apps, and those kinds of the ability to search through my notes or search through my Obsidian notes, or the ability to search Mac stories using a search query string, that sort of thing. Just they could be as simple as that, or even more complex, which a lot of those apps already enable.
Yeah. More pro apps. Obviously, we mention this every year. We are rehashing this particular wish every
Yeah.
year. It's time to have Logic. It's time to have Final Cut. It's time for Apple to show that, yes, you can have those desktop class experiences on iPad. And I'm not talking about, what's it called? Director mode in iMovie. Real Logic, real Final Cut,
Yeah.
not iMovie, not GarageBand, those real pro apps on iPad.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of getting there a little bit with some of the Adobe products that have
Yes.
taken a while to get there, but Photoshop and
Yeah.
Illustrator and Fresco are all very deep apps, and they still don't Photoshop still, for instance, or Lightroom don't match the desktop experience yet, but Adobe has been aggressively pushing those forward over the last couple of years, and they're really getting there. But I do think that it would make a big difference if Apple was putting its resources behind that initiative as well, showing that it can be done with their apps, and looking to see where the pain points have been for companies like Adobe, and making that sort of making tools available to make those sorts of apps easier for a broader audience, not just big companies like Adobe. Federico, let me hit you with another one. I want a clipboard manager so badly on iPadOS.
Oh man,
it's time. It's really time, and it's clipboard manager is so important to so much of what I do when I'm working on my Mac. I spend a lot of time with web forms and working in templates. And so I'm pulling information from a lot of different places, copying it, and then I can just kind of go through a list of things on my clipboard and drop them into various places. It speeds up my work a lot, and I just don't have that advantage on the iPad. And there are apps that we can use to somewhat, I guess, simulate that, but it's just not the same. And I feel like it needs to happen on the iPad this year.
You know what it should be? It should be a Spotlight extension. I'm just saying. That should be.
Yeah, it could be. It very well could be, because that's how things like Alfred and Launchbar and Raycast do that. I mean, they all have that capability built into them, and there's no reason why it couldn't be built into Spotlight as well.
Yeah. Final wish for me. I want to mention widgets. A couple of things. Obviously, interactive widgets. That has to be one of the features of iOS 16 and iPadOS 16. Let me have widgets that support interactions, playback controls, keyboard input. Now, widgets with keyboard input would be amazing on the iPad home screen. Imagine being able to save a thought, an idea, a note into an interactive widget right there from the home screen.
Call it a quick note widget or something like that, right?
Yeah, you can call it that. And obviously, I would love to have more widgets from Apple apps. Why is there no Shortcuts Excel widget on iPad?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's beyond me. Why is there no digital time zone widget from Apple on iPad? I don't know. But also, I would love to get a Safari widget. I want to have a Safari widget to start new Google searches, or to access my favorites, or my bookmarks, or maybe my history items. I don't know. I want to see Safari widgets made by Apple. And also, I lied. I'm sorry. I did have another one final wish. And this probably sounds ridiculous, but hey, we got to mention this. The weather app. Where is
when you were talking about widgets
app on the iPad? I mean, come on, seriously. If they don't do it this year, I will be shocked.
The fact that when you tap on the weather widget, it takes you to weather.com.
Weather.com.
It's just awful.
Come on. All right. So that's it from me on iPadOS 16. Lots of wishes for multitasking, mission control, floating mode based on Quick Note, external display integration, better Spotlight, and new stuff on the home screen, weather app. Overall, I really feel like there's a lot of work to be done, but something needs, I would sum up this part of this episode like this. Something needs to change, and we need to have more options. Put the Pro in iPad Pro when it comes to software, when it comes to multitasking.
Shake it up is what they need to do.
Yes.
I'm going to drop one last one in, Federico, too, for the iPad mini. That layout on the home screen that has to be fixed.
It's awful.
It's a little thing, but it bugs me every time I open my iPad mini.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you have to get them onboarded. If your company is growing, onboarding new developers will be a common occurrence, but it's a big undertaking every single time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is to get up to speed on the projects their new team is working on. This can be tricky if the code bases your developers are working in are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization is helpful, but given the fact that most companies store knowledge in at least 2 different locations, how do you make knowledge accessible to those who need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams without SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues or reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. With SourceGraph, every developer can search across millions of repositories to find specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else. So when questions do come up, you know it's the big stuff that's worthy of your time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they work with the leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of the 5 top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or just click on the link in the show notes to let them know that you heard about them from us. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show.
All right. I have some things I want to talk about regarding shortcuts.
All right. Let's do it.
So I feel like Apple has been doing a really good job following the, I don't want to say disastrous release in September, but it was really problematic.
Call it rocky. Let's just call it
rocky. Let's call it rocky. Let's be kind and call it a rocky release in September. Lots of bugs, lots of glitches, lots of performance issues. They've been really working on those, iterating on the app. They have public release notes pages.
Yeah, which is great. I mean, that's very unusual, and it's nice to see, especially when it comes to the bugs, because a lot of those are the kinds of things that you might not notice for a while until you're using that particular action that was fixed. And so it's nice to be able to kind of run through those and see what was changed.
Yeah. So let's go through some of the easy ones first. The things that we also mentioned before. Obviously, more stability and performance improvements. Continue making shortcuts more stable. I always get the feeling that sometimes shortcuts just break for no reason. That feeling needs to go away. So continue down the path of stability. Automations on the Mac. We've mentioned this before. Personal automations need to come to the Mac. I shouldn't have to rely on the calendar workaround that John covered a while back or third-party apps to run shortcuts on a schedule on my Mac. Personal automation. Bring the same feature from iOS and iPadOS to the Mac. Yep. The widget. I just mentioned it. Give me an Excel widget on the iPad and make the density double the density of the widget, right? I want to see twice the number of shortcuts in the shortcuts widget. So we mentioned this before. And of course, I also mentioned before removing the banner, the confirmation banner that you see every single time you run a shortcut. This is obviously a problem for the people who like to customize app icons by using shortcuts that have the open app action. It's so annoying to use that method because every time you tap on the custom icon, you see that modal banner with the check mark at the end. You know, it's not ideal. And one final easy one that I had an article about this months ago. More actions for Apple apps. More and updated actions for Apple apps. There are so many Apple built-in apps that don't have a shortcuts component at all or that haven't been updated in years. I'm looking at you, Photos, Notes, Safari, like there are music. I mean, the real Apple Music actions based on the Apple Music API. I shouldn't have to use Toolbox Pro for this.
No,
so,
you really shouldn't.
You know, take a good hard look at all these system apps and make sure that having a shortcuts component is one of the features that need to happen on an annual basis, just like, having keyboard support or having pointer support.
Modern actions that actually have parameters and things like that.
Yeah.
There's some there that just need to be updated too, as you said, not just new ones, but to extend the available actions, but also update the older ones with modern takes on them.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into the more exotic stuff.
Okay. Let's do it.
Here's a crazy idea for you, John. Okay? Just hear me out.
Okay.
So, I always hear from people that the hardest part with getting started with shortcuts is the first step, right? Finding the actions and connecting the actions together. You know the kind of shortcut you want to have, but you don't know how to translate your idea into the visual steps. That has to be the biggest, the biggest block for a lot of people is, how do I turn this idea? I know that there's something I want to build. I don't know how. Perfectly valid concern. Now, do you remember back in 2014, that feature from Beats Music, okay, called The Sentence?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
That allowed you to shuffle some music by saying, I'm in the mood for happy music and I'm hosting a BBQ with friends. Like, it kind of worked like I'm sad and I'm laying in bed and I want to listen to indie pop, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I'm bringing this up because imagine The Sentence, but for creating shortcuts. A system based on natural language that assembles a shortcut based on what you're looking for. I'm thinking of, like, imagine if you could open shortcuts and say, I want a shortcut that sends my location to John every time I leave from work between Monday and Friday.
Yeah. This reminds me, this is like an extension of Siri shortcuts, really. It's just done with text instead of...
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I get it. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Use natural language. So if you want to reach as many people as possible, right? Use natural language as a way to break down that barrier that exists between the idea in your mind and actually creating the shortcut in the editor. So what if you, like, because I hear this from Sylvia even all the time, like, I have this idea for shortcuts, like, I know what I want to have, I just don't know how to do it. And that's why I end up, installing shortcuts from other people, or worst of all, not using shortcuts at all. So what if you could use natural language, machine learning, Siri, to turn those ideas into steps? So
I like it. I like it a lot. It reminds me too of IFTTT a little bit.
Yeah. Yes.
If this happens, then do that. It's just that I don't think that IFTTT has ever really gotten to a user-friendly place that I think Apple has the potential with its, team of excellent designers and developers to do itself.
Yeah. So this is for making shortcuts more accessible for new users, right? And it would honestly save me a lot of time, because the worst part of creating the shortcut is doing the manual work,
Right.
Like, it's fine, and shortcuts makes it easier, obviously, than programming something with code. But still, I wonder, there's a way to make it even more intuitive, more accessible. All right, so for the power user stuff, I want to have automation triggers in shortcuts that are based on files and folders. Basically, what Hazel can do on the Mac, but as a trigger in shortcuts. Let me run shortcuts when something happens in a folder. Let me run a shortcut if a file matches a particular condition. I know that you, John, would also like this kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a good way to kind of maintain your file structure and clean up a lot of junk and things like that. That'd be really nice.
Yeah. Better integration with the keyboard just everywhere in shortcuts. But more specifically, I think right now, shortcuts for macOS Monterey is actually a tiny step ahead the iPad app.
Oh, it is.
Because
it's faster to use.
It's faster to use, and on Monterey, you can, use the arrow keys to arrow down and press return to confirm items in a list, for example. That kind of integration should be everywhere in shortcuts, and it should actually be better. When a list of items comes up, let me use search to filter down items in that list. Let me use the arrow keys on my iPad and the Mac to, page down and confirm with return. Like, let me interact with shortcuts as they are running using the keyboard. What else? Let me see. Oh, speaking of lists, right? I mentioned search. The search option is gone from lists, which I don't understand. Let me filter lists by typing a few characters. Like, if a list of items, like if a list comes up and it says Federico, John, Mike, and Steven, let me type F-E to filter down instantly to Federico. That kind of keyboard-based interaction should be possible. And also, I should be able to design lists in shortcuts that are visually nicer than what is currently possible. Let me use images, thumbnails in lists. Let me use subtitles or colored labels. And I guess this speaks to a bigger wish that I have in shortcuts overall, which is the UI building blocks should be more and more modern. Apple should figure out a way to let power users build and design interfaces in shortcuts without much work, but interfaces that go beyond a list, an input field, and an alert, which are basically the three different UI elements you have in shortcuts right now.
Ask for input gets very tedious. I mean, because that's the problem, right? You make a complex shortcut and you have to ask for input.
I guess there's a date picker as well. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. I'll there's some other convenience things that I think would work particularly well on the iPad with the ability to use keyboard input, which would be let me select a block of actions and copy them over to another shortcut all at once. Not just the collapsible ones, like the if statements. Let me do this with arbitrary actions. Maybe shortcuts enters a mode where you can. I'm thinking about how you can choose multiple items on the iPad already when you have lists of content. Do that with actions. Let me select a bunch of them and then just drag them over into another shortcut and copy them that way.
Yeah, and that's also like, I was thinking about those features regarding the debugging tools for advanced users. I shouldn't have to use something like Logger, a third-party app by Alex Hay. I shouldn't have to use Logger to have a console in shortcuts. I should be able to log the output of specific actions. I should be able to pause a shortcut at a specific point to have like breakpoints, basically. I should be able to pause a shortcut and see what's going on. I should be able to color code actions or sections of a shortcut. We've seen this, with Automation April. We just evaluated over 200 shortcuts from people, and many of them were really advanced shortcuts. And I've seen the people struggle with this as well. Like, you shouldn't have to use comments with emoji in them to visually separate parts of your shortcut. That's a workaround, and it's inefficient. You should be able to color code your shortcuts, your actions inside of a shortcut. So more debugging tools. I think it's time to add that kind of stuff.
You should be able to deactivate actions too without having to delete them, right? Because I find myself doing this so often where it's like, okay, I have a problem. Something's not working right in this shortcut. I think it's this action, but I don't want to really delete it because I've already set it up. I just want to deactivate it and maybe drop in a different one to test that and then get rid of the one that is causing the problem. And that sort of thing slows me down because you don't have you have to just delete it. Or maybe, what I end up doing a lot of times is I end up duplicating my shortcuts and saying, okay, I know this much of the shortcut works now and I don't want to mess it up. So I duplicate it and then I work on the duplicated version to do my experimenting. And then before I know it, I've got a whole bunch of the same shortcut in different iterations because there's not, versioning.
Yeah. And so lastly, I will just once again mention more actions, more and new integrations. Let users automate more things, whether it's multitasking on iPad or enabling specific settings, which is something that I get asked about all the time. Like, can I enable this specific setting in the setting? No, you can't. More actions, more apps, more multitasking. Just the quantity is basically what matters in shortcuts. Like, give me more options, and then of course, you gotta develop this on two fronts. Give power users more options and more tools, but also continue making it easier for new users to get started with shortcuts.
Yeah, and you know what? I'll throw another one in here that I have on my mind because I saw Casey Liss asking about it last night, which is actions for tvOS.
Yeah.
There aren't that many really, and you could see that going a lot deeper and allowing people to really create some interesting home theater type of shortcuts. All right, Federico, that's a good discussion. We're in the home stretch now. We're almost, there. I mean, before you know it, it's going to be WWDC, and I'm pretty excited. I feel like I'm more excited about this year than I have been in quite a while. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just the usual anticipation, and I don't remember it. But yeah, let's hope that some of these wishes come true for iPadOS 16.
Yeah.
All right, I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode. That was Revenue Cat, Pillow, and SourceGraph. If you want to subscribe to App Stories, you can do that to get extended episodes every single week that come out a day early on Sundays. And, Federico and I are in high bit rate audio, and there are no ads, too. So check that out at appstories.plus. You can find the two of us over at MacStories, macstories.net. And Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.